whether this is whether the project has been implemented as intended, or whether it is more an attribution question, that those original questions, they really need to drive the types of evaluation tools you choose, and not the other way around. And so all the different evaluation tools out there want to get out of it. And it's not a question of which one is better than another. Each one of them is better for answering specific questions. And if you have the questions, then you can find your tool. It's really with another toolbox in normal life. If you really want to use a nail and put it in the wall, well, you will look for the hammer and not for the screwdriver. That doesn't mean that the hammer per se is better than a screwdriver, because to use it for other purposes, it's not as useful. So I think this is also how we would approach the questions around different evaluation approaches. And so to make this a little bit more concrete, let me just put up maybe this other slide. So basically, along your results chain, you have your activities, you have your outputs, your outcomes. You can basically define questions, and often you do this implicitly, but one can do it much more explicitly as well. And so let me just if you think about monitoring, you know, the more descriptive question, what is going on, how much do things cost, do beneficiaries know about it, how many people are we serving, how many people are dropping out, are people overall satisfied? So these are questions that we can capture with our more traditional monitoring, right? Now, to really have a more normative question as to whether we are achieving objectives, etc., this is where the more traditional performance evaluations come in, right? To look at efficiency, to look at effectiveness, do we achieve gender balance, is the attendance rate satisfactory, what percentage really did meet the placement, are we meeting targets, having recommendations. So these are more the questions about really performance relative to targets and sustainability and so on. And then there's another category, and these are more the cause and effect question, and they really only refer to the outcome level. And this is the question around attribution and whether we see certain effects in the program because our program is there. Now, I'll explain a bit more in a little bit. So it's really depending on your questions that then you'll be able to choose the evaluation approach that should be more valued on. So this is one of the key messages of our manual, to not say this is better than the other, but to say, look, it really depends on what you want to get out of it, and then you choose accordingly. So let me go back to my. Okay, so this brings us to the next, and I think it's the last key message I want to highlight, is that so-called impact evaluations, which are maybe new to some of you, but which probably many of you are realizing that there's an increasing demand for it, and maybe donors. That those are and can have a very important role in your overall sort of M&E framework. And what that means is, just to clarify something, impact, often we talk about sort of the broader, really, development impact and poverty, etc. And when we talk about impact evaluation, we really mean something much more specific. And what we mean is really the difference between what happened as a result of the program, so what compared to what we would have seen if our program hadn't been there. So really talking about a counterfactual in the absence of the program. And of course, it's a little bit tricky, and the question then becomes, how do we estimate what would have happened in the absence of the program? And this is where it gets a little bit more technical, but basically that's what we're interested in. And it's important to realize that I think that understanding what would have happened in the absence of the program can be very, very important. Just imagine the following case. You may have a very well implemented and good functioning program, training program, let's say, and you know it's successful, and you measure, let's say, the income of your unemployed or underemployed youth as they start the program, and let's say they make $100, and you try to increase their income through a youth training, entrepreneurship program, etc. Now, the economy hits really badly, or you have a revolution going on or something else, and at the end of the program you see they are not making $100 anymore. They're actually making only $60. And now, yes, or if you just think about it with in a simple way, you think, oh my God, are those people now worse off because of my program? Well, not necessarily, of course, right? They may actually still be better off than those people who didn't go through your program, but external influences are resulted in them actually being worse off overall despite your training program, on average. And so understanding what your program did compared to what would have happened otherwise is really important. It really tells you a different story. It may prevent you from over or underestimating really your true impact in the program. And so this is why I think this is something we think is a very important tool. And just to briefly mention the two ways this can be done. So how do you then estimate what would have happened in the absence of the program? So basically all the different tools out there can basically be classified in two different categories. One are so-called experimental techniques. And basically, if you have a whole number of interested or eligible participants, oftentimes you have actually more than you can serve at once. And so what you do is you basically flip a coin, randomly assign who will get the program and who, for now at least, for a while, cannot yet get it because your program cannot serve everyone at once, and those others may have to get it later. And if you do this randomly, then what you will have is that the group that you will receive the program will look very similar to the group that won't receive it. And then what you can do is really compare over time throughout the career how those two different groups are doing. Very different, very similar populations on both sides, but one receives the program and one doesn't. And when then you see that the people who participated in your program are better off, then you actually have much more confidence that this is because of your program than if you didn't have that comparison group. The alternative to that is it's in reality sometimes difficult to do this sort of experimental approach from the very beginning. And so the reality is that we do already have chosen some sort of a treatment group for some reason, either because through a partner organization or because we have worked in those neighborhoods anyways and so on. And so we have already a number of young people we work with. And so then we need to try to find among those who aren't participating, we then want to find a group of people who's very similar still to our treatment group. And so then there are a couple of techniques to say, okay, how do we make sure that the people we look at among the non-participants are very similar to our treatment group? And that usually involves some sort of statistical analysis, etc., but we don't have to go into the details. So these are the two ways you can really try to get at that question of what's your true impact. Now, the challenge of that, of course, is that it's often something that you may not be already doing. It involves more time. It may involve much more money because you have to collect data at different points in time, do a baseline, do maybe a follow-up, do an end-line survey, maybe even another larger survey 6, 12 months, 24 months after the intervention ended. And sometimes those impact evaluations can cost $100,000 or more. It requires different skills than the more performance or process evaluations, and sometimes a favorable political context. So what that tells us really is that an impact evaluation shouldn't necessarily be done for every project. Then those resources wouldn't be justified. But we really want to use it for strategically relevant, influential projects where you expect a lot of resources to be spent in the future, or maybe an approach that hasn't been tested. If you're talking about an approach that has been tested already, you may not need another impact evaluation, but you want to use it for more untested and innovative approaches, and you want it to be used for replicable models, because if it weren't replicable, then all those investments may not be worth it. So let's pull up another poll, and I'll ask you a question. So just hypothetically, you may be talking about a pilot project that is $100,000, so small, and then an impact evaluation, which we know can be expensive, right? Let's say $200,000. So would you agree that even for a $100,000 project, an impact evaluation that costs $200,000 may be worth doing. Let's, let me show of hands basically as to whether you agree or not that this might be still an appropriate thing to do despite the potential sort of difference in resources. So do you think it would be worth doing impact evaluation in some cases, even if the project is very small? Oh, here we go. Oh, we are more or less half-half, which, and so that's interesting, right? And there isn't necessarily a right or wrong. But, I mean, I think that, look, if the project is that small, spending more resources or apparently disproportionate amount of resources on the evaluation is not a project for 100,000. Spending 200 on the evaluation, that doesn't make any sense. And I think that's an intuitive answer. Now, I think what it doesn't necessarily capture is we do spend time and again, and then big resources come later on. And what we probably want is to, if we have something innovative, for example, then we want to rather test that small pilot before spending millions and millions of dollars. So it can actually be, and that doesn't mean that it's always the case, but it can be worth doing an impact evaluation, even if it seems relatively expensive and disproportionately expensive on a small pilot before the millions of dollars come in, because then we can already make adjustments for that scaled up version of the project. I think that's important. So an example, for example, a colleague of mine is evaluating a financial literacy project in India, and the intervention is really, I think, very small. It's $60,000, and the impact evaluation is around the same as $200,000. But it's a basically financial literacy intervention in banks, and it costs very little. And so the potential scale up of that, it could reach millions and millions of people. Now, for that, relatively to that potential reach later on, the 200,000 of impact evaluation is really not that much, right? If the project is scaled up to 2, 5, 10 million or more, then it was a very good investment to spend those 200,000 early on a small pilot, rather than already wasting a lot of resources in the process. So this is just, an example of how it can be tricky also to make some of those decisions. When should it happen? And that's sort of what I will close with, is to, you shouldn't do an impact evaluation very much, not at the absolutely beginning. You should, really resolve the operational issues, so you make sure that you evaluate actually the project that is running as you intended to run, and then you do an impact evaluation on that sort of full pilot, but before you really launch it on scale. So wait till the program's operating smoothly and evaluate it before substantial resources are invested. So I'm not going to do a summary, but bottom line, it can be much more than just accountability, and it's really monitoring is the basis for what you do, and your learning objectives will decide what approach, whether it's a more standard performance evaluation or actually an impact evaluation, is the right thing for you. And what we do have is, you may not have seen it, but online we do have a couple of extra resources on indicators, data collection tools, etc., as well as some of terms of reference survey instruments that we're still wanting to put up. This may be useful for you to actually also really implement some of those things. And if you want to also stay up to date, because this is really a field that is moving a lot with a lot of discussion, there are a lot of blogs in our resources section of the guide. There are other resources, and I just mentioned 3 here, but there are many others that will help you to also stay up to date with some of those questions and discussions. So thank you, and then we can open it up for questions.